Hello and welcome here for another healing story with us. Today we've got Traci Powell, and I'm super excited to learn from Traci. She's got some really a lot of insights for us, also from a professional side and a lived experience as well. So thank you so much for making time for us here today, Traci.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Yeah. Thank you. I think, would you like to start sharing with us a little bit of what your life was like before you started the healing journey? Like what were your symptoms? What did you experience? And perhaps what was the kind of point where you realized, oh, I do need to reach out for help. I can't do this alone.
Sure. My life really on the outside looked like it was pretty good. I took on the perfectionist role and said, I have to keep going and keep doing and keep building, because I had all these things inside of me I didn't want to deal with. But so I desperately wanted to get out of my house. So I went into nursing school as soon as I could. And I got my 2-year nursing degree and moved out of my house. And then I just kept kind of mustering my way through life. But through especially my 20s, I had bad relationship after bad relationship, and got to the point where I thought there was something literally genetically wrong with me. And I just thought, what is wrong with me? I can't be happy. No matter how much fun I would look like I was having with my friends, I always had this constant underlying sadness. I always, if I happened to drink, I would end up bawling my eyes out. And I would isolate myself. And I got to where I had girlfriends, but if their boyfriends came into the room, I would shut down. And then like everybody said, oh, well, you must just be a man hater. And I was like, I don't hate men. I don't know what it was at the time that would make me feel that way. And I had an aunt who was single most of her life, got a divorce, and raised her 3 kids. And I watched her and I thought, it must be genetic. Like there just must be something in our family where we don't know how to have a good relationship. So my friends who had boyfriends, I would watch them and just think, nothing made sense to me. I knew I wasn't a lesbian, but I knew I didn't do well with relationships with men. And I don't know, I just had this constant underlying sadness about me. And because I never really talked about what happened to me as I got older and got more degrees and got more well-known in my field, I got more separated from the abuse. I believed more and more and more that there was something wrong with me. And so I got my bachelor's degree. I then became a neonatal nurse practitioner and worked in a NICU for many years. And when I was in that NICU in my mid-40s, I had moved to Florida away from New Jersey, which was where I grew up, where all my abuse happened. And I would go back up and visit every now and again. And I would come back and have like this depression that usually I could shake, but this one particular year, I couldn't shake it. And I had been in a relationship with this man that I really cared about, but it ended because we had issues with me, like really being vulnerable. And like, I didn't connect that on the deepest level, like he wanted to. And then the movie Frozen came out. I don't know if you know this movie. Are you familiar with it?
Slightly. I have seen pictures. I haven't actually seen the whole movie.
So it's going to sound a little crazy, but I went to see Frozen. I took my kids with me and we're watching the movie. And the movie really is about this pale blonde woman who was forced to hide a secret her whole life. And she was locked away and isolated. And as I watched this cartoon and how her story unfolded, I was like, this is me. Like I had remembered parts of my abuse, but a lot of it I had deeply tucked away. And watching that movie really started to unlock a lot of flashbacks. And I really, off and on throughout my life, I would think, especially if I had been drinking, like I would have flashes of things and I would know that it was somehow related, but I just kept like, no, I don't want to deal with this. And so
I relate to that.
Yeah. I went online and I Googled, how do I heal from sexual abuse? As if there was going to be this one line answer from Google. Here's what you do. Tomorrow you'll be fine. And I didn't like what I was reading. It was like, oh, you can't do it by yourself. You need to get help, all this other stuff. And so I found this website that was built just for survivors of sexual abuse. And I went in there and I still have the post that I wrote 8 years ago that said, here's my life. I'm a nurse practitioner. I have a beautiful house in a beautiful state with amazing kids. I volunteer for all these organizations. I want to kill myself. I hate myself. I don't want to be here anymore. And it was the first time I felt understood, because all of these people responded to me and said, I get it. And one lady said to me, you know, you probably have PTSD. And I was like, no, I don't. And so she sent me a self-assessment and said very kindly, just check this out and see what you think. And I took it, and it was the first test that I ever got 100 on, that I was not thrilled to get 100. But it was the first time I opened my eyes to, wow, I have been dealing with PTSD my entire life. I didn't know at the time that there was complex PTSD. So within that group, they said, find someone, a therapist who specializes in trauma and does EMDR. And we're familiar with EMDR.
Yes. Yeah. I've never myself, it'd be too over stimulating, or I haven't.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, but that was the advice that I got. So I did find a local therapist who specialized in trauma and did EMDR. And I went, and I was like, I'd read a lot about EMDR. I'm like, oh, this is going to change my life. I'm going to, get over it. It's all going to be fine. And, it wasn't little by little, as all the memories started coming back and everything. It was well beyond the sexual abuse. It was alcoholism, and there was all kinds of awful stuff that went on in my house that I had to deal with. And
it all comes up at once then, isn't it? Once you just get a few snippets, but when you start looking in, it's like it becomes overwhelming.
Yes. Well, and it's almost like your brain finally says, I can't take it anymore. You need to take all this back. Well, it wasn't even my brain. Like I thank my 9-year-old self. She carried the box of torture of memories for me for a long, long time. And once things started to open up, I started to hate that girl. I had all kinds of horrible feelings about it. And when I started in therapy, the memories really got bad. And I'll never forget, my therapist had a car accident, and she was not a smoker that I knew of up to that point, but I walked into her office one day, and the office smelled like stale cigarette smoke, where she had just been outside having a cigarette because that's how she was coping with her accident. And that blew open a whole wide array of memories.
The smell is so...
Yes. Because my two main abusers were both heavy smokers, and everything smelled of cigarette smoke. So we would try EMDR, and I would get disorganized, and I would get dysregulated, and I would get frustrated. And in my head, I'd be like, parts of me were like, you can't trust her. And my biggest fear in it was, you have 60 minutes to get in there, talk about it, do EMDR, and get the heck out. And I was like, I can't do that. And I would get nowhere. And then I would beat myself up, and I'd be like, what is wrong with me? Again, the issue is me. And so she would come back at me and be like, well, you need to meditate. Okay. Well, to ask someone who has massive flashbacks to meditate is, for me, borderline cruel. I felt like I was the problem again, because I couldn't just sit and clear my mind and meditate, because all these things were coming into my head that were, that was bad.
Yeah.
So finally one day I went back into the group, and I don't even remember what the post was I put in there, but somebody else said to me, it sounds like you have complex PTSD. And I was like, well, what is that? And I started to read about it, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so me.
Yeah.
And then I found a video about complex PTSD, and I went to my therapist and I said, would you please just watch this video, because it so perfectly describes me.
Yeah.
And so between sessions, she watched it, and I went back the next time, and she was like, I have not been doing you a good service. We need to find someone who understands this for you. The problem was, nobody really understood it around here. And I was having challenges with, because I took on the perfectionist role, even my therapist would say to me, you don't look like you feel as bad as you say you do. So because I was a professional, because I had this, what looked like a good life.
Yeah.
So even that kind of shut me down. Like, I don't even have a right to feel bad about what happened to me, because I don't look the part.
Yeah.
Like, what the heck?
Yes. it's
And when
you didn't fit the stereotype, isn't it? Because the stereotype there is like you're not working, you're perhaps even homeless and all these and aggressive perhaps and things like that. Yeah. Well, yeah.
Yeah, none of that was me. And to have my therapist say to me, you don't look like you feel as bad as you say you are. That led to some really dark times. And, you know, I got to the point where I was ready to end my life. Yeah. And I did make an attempt, but thank goodness that night, my kids were in bed, but in the middle of, like, I felt like I was losing myself. I heard my daughter laugh and she was in bed. So I don't know where the sound came from, but it pulled me out of what I was in. And I got up and I was like, there's no way I'm going to let what someone else did to me take my life. Yeah. And there's no way I'm going to let this happen to another person if I can help it. And so I got up the next day and I said, that's it. I got to figure out how to overcome this thing because these assholes don't get me. They don't get to take my life anymore because my abusers were dead by this point too. They're gone and I'm still suffering.
It doesn't take it away, does it? It's
oh no. Yeah. No, in fact, it stirred things up a lot. So I went on a mission to figure out how I could get back to the core me because my abuse started before I could talk. And I was convinced that there was no core me, that I was just an abuse survivor. And but what I found out is that's not true. The me that I am is not an abuse survivor. Abuse is something that happened to my body, but the core me sits in this shell that someone else took advantage of. And so I had to find my light, and it was always there. It was covered by a lot of darkness by a lot of other people. And once I got to that through doing ego state therapy and healing the wounds of the little girl inside of me, I broke free of it. And then I went back and got my psychiatric nurse practitioner. And now I work with other people and help them find their light and understand that abuse doesn't have to define who you are. And this can be overcome should you choose to step into it.
Yes. This is so powerful. I might just mention it. I might actually put that link to that video you were talking about initially that opened up. That is me. That is complex PTSD. I might put that in the description below for other people to watch as well. But the way you describe that sense of self, it's so beautiful, isn't it? And I also had to remind myself that from a physiological point of view, the cells that are on my skin right now aren't the cells that they touched, because our body constantly regenerates, isn't it? It's no longer the same. All these little things I had to remind myself of this. It's different. I am different now. Yes. But I'm curious about the ego state therapy, because that's not something that's talked that much about. I don't know that much about that. That's not the one
I got to tell you, honestly, it changed my life. And I am speechless every time I work with my clients. And so, what I do with my clients is people come to me for full days, 2 or 3 days at a time. Because, first of all, that 60-minute window, there's so much pressure and people, we're afraid to touch the trauma. Yeah. Things that hold us back greatly are fear, right? And shame. And so the first thing I will say to people is, one, to try to remember the thing that you're afraid of doesn't exist anymore. Right? So there's a lot of fear about, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to go back and face it. Yes. It's understandable. But if you're in a safe place now, you're not in an abusive situation, it doesn't exist. It's like a movie. If you're in a horror movie and it's terrifying you, you can turn it off. You can get up and leave the theater. So what happens is when we go through traumatic childhoods, there's 2 wounds of childhood. There's trauma, which is abuse, sexual abuse, physical neglect. But then there are also what are called attachment wounds. Yes. So the trauma are things that happen to you. Attachment wounds are the things that didn't happen that should have. So I wasn't seen, I wasn't heard, I wasn't protected. I was put down all the time. Nobody helped me build self-esteem. And I have many people come to me who they're like, I had no abuse as a kid. But then we learn, I had a narcissistic parent who their way of punishing me was they wouldn't talk to me for 2 weeks if I looked at them the wrong way. That's detrimental to a child. So ego state therapy says there are parts of us during childhood that get stuck in the trauma. When our developmental needs aren't met and we're put into a state of intense fear or an intense psychological state where I start to believe I don't matter, I'm not important, parts of us get stuck in that and get stuck in those false beliefs. So with ego state therapy, you go back to the parts. So just like, as adults, I'm a mom, I'm a nurse practitioner, I'm a volunteer. Also parts of me, there was a little girl, especially the 9-year-old me, who dealt with the worst of it. And so what we do is we go back and we rewrite the story. And that doesn't mean like you change the details. Your story is your story and it happened. But you can go back to that child part and help her know it wasn't about her, that the people that did these things had their own problems, probably had someone do these things to them, and that the child always had their own light that other people shadowed. And so you resource the person as the adult. So like if I said to you, can you think of a time recently when you cared for someone unconditionally, you just showed up for them? And ask, I would ask you, like, how did that feel to show up for someone and be there for them?
Yeah.
What traits were you showing that person? So, and usually people will say empathy, love, right? So that's you, that came from you. So then I will say, well, how would it feel to 9-year-old you if that you was there with her? And if you, even think about in the moment, if I can go back to the age that, I felt a lot of pain and put that person with her, instantly people are like, wow, she never felt that before.
Yes. And you can't,
when you can
60-minute session, because that
no.
Actually connecting with that fact, what would that have felt like for my younger self to receive that? That brings up so much emotions, doesn't it?
Yes.
That sadness and that grief for what we did not have.
Right. But the amazing thing is, usually the emotion that comes up is, oh my gosh, someone's hugging me.
Yeah.
Someone's loving me. And so the tears come from, this feels good.
Yes. Yeah.
Because you're not, if we just think about when you were 9, what are the things that happened and what didn't you have? Then there's the grief that you have to have from that.
Yeah.
But if we can go back in and give that part of you love and compassion and empathy, that's where the healing is. And then helping the part to know this is a recording that you're living in. 9-year-old you, and I will talk directly to the part. And this isn't, so complex PTSD is a dissociative disorder. We all dissociate, and it's on a continuum. And so it can be mild dissociation all the way to the extreme opposite end of dissociative identity disorder, which is known as multiple personality disorder. But so it's dissociation, right? Those little parts that are stuck in us. And it doesn't mean, some people are like, well, what are you saying? I have multiple personality disorder? No, but there are parts of you that are stuck in the trauma. And if you think about complex PTSD is a relational problem, right? We don't interact well with the world, with ourselves, we get disconnected. This is about reconnecting to you and to those parts of you who believe they don't have a right to show up in the world. Those parts that are afraid to attach to other people and to be intimate with other people. And I don't mean through sex, I just mean like being close. And so when you can go back to those parts and make them feel loved and wanted and secure, it helps the adult. And when you help that younger part and you help them realize, but you are an adult now. When you were a child, you didn't have a way out. You were stuck in your house. You couldn't control the people around you. Now as an adult, you have money, you have a car, you can get in your car and go. You can, if somebody knocks at your door that you don't want to talk to, you can shut the door and say, don't come in. Yeah. Right. So it's helping those parts feel loved and wanted and healed and empowered to step into their life today.
Yes. It's beautiful, isn't it? That it's kind of that's closing those memories. Like it's like all these, like for a while at the beginning, all those memories were up and they were like right in front of my face, and all I could think of is all the trauma stuff that happened. Yeah. Oh, it's actually really hard for me to come. I know what happened, but I no longer remember what they even said. Like when I was going through the crisis, I could smell the things, like you said, I was reliving it, but it fades off as you process through that. Like you said, you're giving your younger self what do you need back then. It's so beautiful. And you, that is not something you can get in a pill. This is actually something that's facilitated in the therapy. This is when you find someone that you can trust enough to actually explore that, and it's like you're opening yourself up, you're making yourself vulnerable to have that conversation, isn't it?
Yeah. And the thing that's really important to know is that it doesn't come from the therapist, right? I guide my clients, but it comes from within them.
Yes.
When we identify whatever recent event, you know, it could even be a pet, someone that you cared for and gave love to, and to help the person access those feelings. Because oftentimes people with really intense complex PTSD are like, well, I've never felt happy. I don't know what love feels like.
Yes.
But when you help them think about, there's got to be at some point in your current life when, even if you just answered the phone and you were nice to the person on the phone, if they really can't figure out a point in their life, then look at movies or TV shows. Who is someone that you look at and say, wow, if that had been my mom, it would have felt so good.
Yes.
So it's that resource to go back and help that part feel, but it still comes from within the person.
Yes. Yeah, it's so true that I think many of us intellectualize emotions. Like I learned them from textbooks to know this is what love feels like, or this is what, you know, this is anxiety, or this is worried, all that little differences. I didn't know what it felt like in my body. I was oblivious to the whole thing. And it's a safety mechanism or protective mechanism too, isn't it, from our younger self? It's just,
it is. You know, and the sad part of it is, because we have to shut down the negative emotions, that causes us to shut down the positive emotions too.
Yeah.
But life is full of all emotions.
Yes.
And complex PTSD, one of the greatest challenges of it is it's such an all or nothing problem, right? Things are either all great or they're all bad, or everybody hates me or everybody loves me.
Yeah.
But really, life is in the middle. And you know, part of it is working with those parts of us and saying, no, this isn't all bad. My therapist said to me one time, did you ever consider that everybody else's bad mood is not your fault? And I'm telling you, I was 48 when she said that to me. And to that point, no, I had never considered that. I thought everybody else's bad mood, I had to take care of. It was my fault. I had done something.
Yeah.
And the reality is, they're not even thinking about me. Yes. Man, was that free when I was like, wow, it's really not about me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But and I think this is why it's so important, because people always ask me all the time if they can do it themselves. And it's like, yeah, you can do a lot of healing by yourself, a lot. You don't, but some of those things you need another person to guide you there to that realization, isn't it? to validate that, for this to happen. And it's beautiful. Those ahas, and it's transformational, isn't it? Because once you,
it really is.
It's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. So one of my most favorite sayings ever was by Carl Jung, who said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate.
Yes.
Right. And so, you know, that was my whole life. I thought my DNA was flawed. I thought there was a genetic problem that I couldn't associate with other people. Well, you know, for some reason, there was something wrong with my blood. Yes. And then when I understood, oh no, something happened to you when you were a child and it affected the way that you see yourself in the world, and that came into my consciousness, then I could do something about it. And so that's, you know, when people come for the intensives, the first day in the morning, I help them understand that, like, and it's never about vilifying people. You know, it's never good when somebody abuses us, but the reality is most abusers had their own abuse. And so they made the choice to take it out on someone else, where others of us have said, no, I'm not going to hurt someone else, but they still, it's a perpetual process. And so by helping the person understand, this is about you, the person. Yes, someone made decisions to hurt you, but that was about them, their pain, what they were going through, what they decided to take out on another person. It wasn't about your worth. And then spending those days getting to the parts of them that hold the hurt. And then they actually do go forward, because then once we identify the parts that hold the hurt, some of them we heal, some of them integrate into their adult self, and some of them they go home. And like, I live near Disney World. I moved here because I knew all my child parts would be happy near it. And every single time I'm walking down Main Street, USA in the Magic Kingdom, I imagine my 9-year-old next to me, happy with popcorn, because I wasn't allowed to eat any snacks. Food was hidden from me, right? So she gets, in my mind, she has everything she ever wanted. And when she has joy, that joy fills me.
Oh, so beautiful. It is. Oh, it is giving ourselves permission to do that for ourselves now, isn't it? And
that really is, because the sad truth is our brains are built to go towards what is familiar. And when you've lived an abusive life, that's what's familiar. And so again, going back to our subconscious, we will subconsciously keep ourselves stuck because it feels familiar to be there. And so that's what's comfortable. And it really is to dare step out of the sadness and the, hard feelings of it and decide, wow, I think I might try to be happy today. That's what's unfamiliar.
Oh yeah. It feels wrong.
Yeah.
When you have different emotions, it's like, oh, is that okay for me to be that happy?
Yeah. And for a long time, I actually felt like I was letting down the abused girl that I was by being happy. I just felt like, how could I be happy when what happened to her was so horrible?
Yes. Oh yeah.
But I had to learn that the best gift I could give her was to help her find some joy in her life.
Oh yes. I can so relate to all this. Yeah. Oh, this is just beautiful. So I didn't check that with you before, but I know you're doing that work and you're running those workshops. Are you happy for people to contact you? You're okay with me sharing perhaps your details down below?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I literally have people come from all over.
Yeah.
To spend a couple of days and work. And I actually went out into the PTSD, complex PTSD resources group, and asked if anyone would be interested in doing an online group. This would be more coaching, but it's ego state stuff. And several people have responded. So if I get a few more people, then I'm going to do, it would be cool to have a whole worldwide conversation about this.
Yes.
And help people get in touch with their younger wounded selves.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Then we could have a field trip to Disney World someday.
True. Yeah, it's quite amazing. Like the technology. I think this is like the generations before us. They didn't have the technology. They didn't have a Google do search what is complex PTSD. They didn't have any of that available. That what we have, and what we also have available now is the Zoom. Like if there is no therapist in your area because you're so rural that there is no one specialized in that field, now you can have someone from a different country, interstate, or even a different continent. It's like Zoom it's not the same as sitting in the room, but I feel like I have a connection with you here too. It's like it's virtual, but it's, and I'm pretty sure pretty soon they're going to have some device so it really looks like we're looking at each other's eyes, so the camera is kind of off center.
The virtual reality world.
Yeah. So that's so powerful.
Yeah, it's important because unfortunately there aren't enough providers who understand how to help childhood trauma. And it makes my skin crawl now when I read people with complex PTSD post about something's wrong with me because I can't do EMDR.
Yeah.
Because most of the trauma world thinks EMDR is the answer to everything. Yes. And I mean, the reality is those attachment wounds, if we don't deal with them first, EMDR is not going to work. Because, I can remember some of the EMDR things I was trying to work through in my mind. While I knew what the trauma was that was happening to me, I could always see myself knowing I was next door to my parents who didn't care that I was gone. Like that was the deepest wound. And I couldn't get to what was happening to me because we weren't healing that. Like that little girl needed to know they let her down. They didn't protect her.
Yeah.
And once I healed that, I didn't even need to deal with the trauma part. Like that was just an afterthought at that point. I needed to know that I mattered And I had to be able to heal that wound. And then I could recognize what happened to me by my abuser next door was so much more about him than it was me. And what happened to my body does not define who I am.
Yes. So powerful. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because yeah, I do see a lot of those kind of posts when people, especially with the EMDR, when they feel like it didn't work for them, and then they feel like I'm too broken, or some people are told that they are treatment resistant, and this is such.
It drives me crazy.
I always say no, there's no such thing. It just means that therapist was at the end of the tools. They didn't have anything else to offer to you. But there is other things out there. You just haven't found the right therapist who is skilled in that way. That's it. I think that's.
And sometimes some therapists don't know what they don't know, and so they might think they've tried everything, but if they don't even know what complex PTSD, they're not going to be able to know how to help someone heal from it.
Yeah.
And so most importantly, like I always had this nagging inside of me that said, because I had a psychiatrist try to tell me I was bipolar, and I was like, I know I'm not. I know what happened was I had so much depression for so long that on the rare occasion that I had a good day, it felt extreme. And so in his mind, oh, well, you must be bipolar. Well, no, actually, I'm having a normal day today compared to my usual sadness. Now I know the sadness came from this wounded little girl in me that needed someone to care about her. So if people have this nagging, like it just doesn't fit, don't accept the diagnosis. Don't accept what that person is telling you. It doesn't mean that they're maliciously doing it. It just means that they might not be educated enough to understand how to help you. But there is healing from this.
Yeah. And I think sometimes I am too judging too, because all they really see is that small glimpse, like this. With some of the doctors, you really only see them like for 15 minutes or half an hour or 50 minutes. And they get this small glimpse out of your life and they make a diagnosis based on that. So to give, yes, they might make mistakes if they in that setting, if they don't spend the time to get to know you better. Is it that to realize, oh no, this isn't actually bipolar over time.
Yeah, they were 15-minute appointments. And I was like, here, let's just decide what medication I should give you and be done. And medicating this, it can help with the symptoms, but I view it as the equivalent of if you had an infection, said you have strep throat, right? And you've got a fever. If I keep handing you Tylenol, your fever might get better, but the strep throat's not going away.
No.
I got to treat the strep throat. It's the same with this. If I keep giving you pills, it might lighten your anxiety. It might help your depression, but it's not going away because we haven't gotten to the root of the problem, which are those attachment wounds and those trauma wounds. And so when you get to the root and can get it out of there, it kind of takes care of the anxiety and depression.
Yeah.
And, I have moments where I go back.
Yeah.
Things happen in my life. And I have issues with my mother sometimes. And that will kind of like remind me, oh, that's right. That's who she is. But I have to, now I give myself the grace to say, I have a reason to feel sad.
Yes.
And I'm going to let myself feel it, but I'm not going to stay stuck in it. I'm going to move through this.
That's it, isn't it? We're allowed to feel it, but we don't get stuck in it. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing openly with us. Was there anything else that you think of that you still wanted to share and you don't want to cut you? I think this is super valuable and super helpful what you've shared so far. So.
Now, the biggest thing for me is it breaks my heart more than anything when I hear people say things like I used to say, like there's something wrong with me. That whole, like, it's my fault. I can't do this right. And, a lot of that comes from the voice that we got when we were a child, because when the adults who should have cared for us didn't, we do something called self-abandonment. Because in a kid's life, you don't have a choice but to leave yourself behind. And a lot of us will take the side of the abuser, right? And start beating ourselves up and putting ourselves down and not taking care of ourselves. And as we grow into adulthood, now those habits have formed that now I just need to beat me up and believe that I am the problem.
Yes.
But the truth is, you came into the world as an innocent being. And whoever that baby is handed to is going to have a major impact on how that child sees themselves as an adult. But the day that child came into the world, they were a blank slate. And all the shadows of other people that covered their lights can be put away. And you can find your light again with the right guidance and the right tools. It's always been there. I had to, like I said, I don't remember a time abuse wasn't part of my life, but I do now remember the light that I was born with and the core me that I am. And she's somebody I like to hang out with. And that is my greatest wish for anybody who comes to work with me or anyone who's going through this, to know you're allowed to give yourself permission to not be sad. You're allowed to give yourself permission to move on in your life and embrace life, because life really is ours to choose. The child in you that may be stuck in the abuse might not know that yet. And so share with that child, you know what, we've grown up now and I can make choices for us that will make things better.
Yes, beautiful. You completely changed that relationship with that younger self, isn't it? Like you said, I think you mentioned at the beginning, you more hated, you had hate towards yourself.
Oh, horribly. I was almost, well, I wasn't a worse abuser than they were, but I took over for them, right? I took over the comments that they made to me. I reinforced them. I was not good to my body. Just because I walked next door as a child. And so I was like, shame on me for why would I do that? I was a kid.
Yeah.
He was great at teaching me what I should do and scaring the crap out of me.
Yes.
And so I had to quit holding that kid accountable and instead have grace for her and compassion for her and recognize she was in a no-win situation.
Yes.
And so she was just doing what she couldn't survive.
Yeah. And she did an amazing job at that.
She did.
Back at that age, with what was available to her, she did amazing. She survived. It's beautiful.
Yes. And she didn't give up.
Yes. That little, I always say, that's my inner warrior, my younger self.
Yes. That's so funny you say that. That's exactly what I say.
Oh, really?
I have this whole piece that I wrote about her being a warrior, and she fought the fight for me.
Yes.
Because, I vividly remember leaving my abuser's house and feeling myself leaving part of me there. I had to leave the abused part of me there because I had to go to school. My parents made me go to church every week. I had to be able to show up in life, and I wasn't going to get helped by my parents. And so I, to this day, remember like feeling myself just kind of split.
Yeah.
And for many years, I forgot that girl that I left behind. And then when she came back, like she needed me, and I turned my back on her. And it wasn't until I said, you know what? I get that you need me, and you did me a favor for a lot of years, and now it's time that we reconnect and I help you heal. Yeah. And unfortunately, it took a really bad decision one night to get me to that point, but thank goodness that night didn't end the way that I initially intended it to. Yeah. And no, life is, I would have never thought I'd say life is good. Yeah. Like I know joy and I know peace, and I can appreciate a sunset, and it's all, there's a lot of self-care that goes with this. I have a very stressful life, and still I have PTSD. And so if I have too much stress, I can end up, not feeling well or getting triggered. And so I have to manage that all the time. But I choose me first now, and I do the things that I need to do to help keep me from getting too caught up in feeling bad or.
Yes, it's the way you do it, isn't it? You still have strong emotions. I think it's part of being human. Things happen and stuff. We have strong emotions, but the way we manage them and the way we treat ourselves in those moments that's what changes, and that's where the magic is. I think that's
so right. Yeah, because if you make a mistake, and we all make mistakes, right? There was a time in our life if we made a mistake, somebody might have beat us for it. So as an adult, if we're making a mistake, our instinct go to, because our brain likes what's familiar, is let me beat myself up. But if instead you catch yourself and say, nope, it was a mistake, and I'm allowed to forgive you
Mm.
because I'm in charge of you,
Yeah.
right? The inner me that I am. And giving ourselves the grace and compassion that no one else did for a lot of years as kids. It changes everything.
Yeah. And it takes practice, isn't it? Like
it sure does.
You keep falling back into the beating up things, but you keep catching yourself faster and faster and faster. So it's not a once-off choice. I'm no longer going to do it. And it's not, no, it's like, no, I'm just getting better and better at myself. And then eventually it just...
it's funny. I'll tell you a quick story if you want. So I'm a psychiatric nurse practitioner, but I'm also a neonatal nurse practitioner. So for many years, I worked in the NICU. I could get an IV in the tiniest of babies. And so when people needed an IV and they couldn't get it, they would come to me and I would go and do it. And I, like many people with complex PTSD, couldn't take a compliment. They would make my flesh crawl. It would make me want to cry. But if I would go and do an IV, the parents would be so grateful that I got it and the baby didn't have to suffer. And I couldn't even say to let them thank me. I would do it and get out of the room. Because you're seen as the hero when you've done this thing, right?
And it just doesn't fit the image.
Not at all. So once I made the decision, I had to get better from this thing. That was the first thing that I started in my life, just a little bit, forcing myself, once I did an IV, to stand there and let the parents say thank you. And there's actually research that shows if you allow yourself to be in the good, whether or not you can feel it, just let yourself be in it, over time, you will start to accept it more. And so I went from start an IV and run to my office and cry because people said, thank you, and you did a great job, to start an IV, stand here and let the nurses and parents thank me. And then I would quickly say, you're welcome. And then I would leave and go to the office and cry. And then it got to where I would make myself stay a little bit longer and I would engage with the parents and be like, I'm glad I was able to be here for your baby.
Yes.
And so, exactly what you just said. It's not an overnight thing. It doesn't immediately happen. It's constant rehearsal. And I'll tell you, there's times even now, if I get a compliment, I got to catch myself and be like, all right, I have to appreciate that this person is appreciating what I did for them. And the little girl in me who's afraid of this compliment, I'm going to help her know that she's worthy of it.
Yes.
And so, there's some things I still have to take the time and work through, but it's making the choice to do it rather than just say, no, I suck and I don't deserve that.
Yes. It's that is a hard one for me too. And I even not even that long ago in the Thriver Root community, we have like group calls on Zoom, and someone made me a compliment or something, and I just took over and they pulled me up on it. I said, hey, Tanja, that was a compliment. And it's like, oh, wow.
But part of what I came to realize with that, I'll challenge you with this, is we also deprive the complimenter of them being able to do a nice thing. Right. And so I'm not taking it and I'm not giving them the respect that, wow, they appreciate what I'm doing.
Yes.
And so, it's a great challenge. It's, one of the hardest things, I think, for all of us to deal with this. But to allow yourself to be in the moment, and in the moment, if it makes you feel bad, ask yourself, how old do I feel right now? Does this feel like my very adult self, or do I feel way younger? And chances are you're going to find out you feel way younger, even when you're triggered. If in that moment, you can say, how old do I feel right now? And if you don't know the exact age, do I feel like a teenager? Or do I feel like a child? If the answer is not, I feel like the very adult self that I am, then you're triggered and you need to partner with that part of you and just say, 15-year-old, 10-year-old, there was a time when it was scary for you to have a good thing happen, or, there was a time when you should have been afraid, but now you don't need to be afraid and you can take this compliment, or, whatever thing is going on.
Yes.
So that you can partner with that part of you.
Yeah. Who would have thought that we need a process around actually letting a compliment touch our heart, isn't it? It's like, it's something beautiful. And we're struggling with that. Yeah. There's so many parts to it. And I think a therapist who doesn't understand that attachment wound might actually miss those pieces, that it's not, that's even the compliments that are struggling with.
Right.
Yeah. It's all part of that. I guess it's that interpersonal aspect.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly. And I remember my therapist looking at me. This is the first one that I had that I didn't go to anymore. And she would say to me, I'm going to give you a compliment and you're just going to sit there and you're going to take it. And it was like, it doesn't work like I have to be honest. I cannot stand, oh my gosh, I can't think of the word, the Post-it notes, affirmations.
Yes.
Drive me out of my mind. I could, and she wanted me to do it all the time. I can say 1,000 times to myself, I love myself, I love myself, I love myself. But if I have this part of me inside saying, no, you hate yourself, it's not going to change things. It took me going inside and saying, why do I hate myself? And coming up with the answers for that. What part of me is holding this hatred for myself that's preventing me from even beginning to think that I could love myself? Affirmations are great for, like, I love, I am powerful. I can make my own decisions. Those are reminders that we need all the time, that we need to keep reminders. I can decide today if I'm going to stay depressed in bed or if I'm going to put my feet on the floor and at least get up and go sit in the sun for a minute. Right? I can make those choices.
Yes.
The self-talk takes some time, and it takes getting into those wounds that we have to help them heal. But we can do it.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. That's what those affirmations. You got to be able to believe them, or at least an aspect of it, because otherwise it's just superficial.
Right.
Gives you ideas of what other people would say, I guess. But yeah, it doesn't change anything, isn't it? Yeah. So true. So guys, if you're doing those affirmations and it doesn't make you feel any better, that's what.
Don't feel bad. If you are doing them, it does. Yay.
Yes.
But I think that's one of my greatest frustrations. What is mainstream doesn't necessarily fit for someone with complex PTSD. And then that leaves us feeling so misunderstood.
Yes.
And like there's something wrong with us. And we're way more broken than we ever thought. And it's just not the case. It's just that you haven't had the right guidance.
Yeah. Yeah, I had those. I even bought a book, and that was back in the days when we still had cassettes. I recorded a cassette for myself with all these affirmations, and I was listening to them while I was walking, train. I'm going to brainwash myself.
Did that work for you?
No, not really, but it gave me ideas, I guess. It made no change the way I still hated myself, but I just thought that this is what other people think. This is the kind of thoughts that other people have going on when they made a mistake, or they've, that's how they talk to themselves. That's what compassion to self, what it could look like, because I couldn't come up with my own sentences. They were always from therapists. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, but I was so determined. So I had a cassette. Oh dear. All the things that we try. And I think it's important that we celebrate it, that we actually had the courage to try it. It didn't work.
Yes, so for sure.
I tried it. That's yay. It's so.
It's not a failure. It just means that's not the thing that works for you.
Yeah. It's a step outside of your comfort zone, trying something new.
Right.
Yeah.
It's all about reconnecting with the self. Because if you can reconnect with yourself, that's the key to loving yourself. Yeah. As long as we're separated from ourselves, which, many of us, I would say most of us, especially with complex PTSD, we're not in our own bodies. We're not reconnected to ourselves. And so feelings become scary. Yeah. And so then we disconnect even more because if, an extreme feeling comes up, we want to run from it. And so it's really just taking the time to get to know you, the core you, the feelings that you have, where they come from, just having compassion.
Yes, that's it, isn't it? I wish I realized that the key was the compassion or kindness towards myself and that connection. That's what I was fighting that. So we're going to fix my brain first. And once I'm fixed, then we can do the compassion part. I need to be fixed.
Yes, but the problem is, especially with childhood trauma, there's so much, those attachment wounds, man, they will get you. And they will keep a lot of the, it is definitely a physical problem and a psychological problem. And if I keep telling myself or feeling as if I'm worthless,
Yes.
And then I end up triggered when things happen that really make me feel like I'm horrible. Then that stress response just keeps going. And it's just this self-feeding problem that we have.
Mm.
And then we do things to numb ourselves, eat, drink, whatever it is. And then shame kicks in because we've numbed ourselves out. We've done that again. And then we beat ourselves up again. And it's just this never ending cycle.
Mm. Yes. We can interrupt this. We can say this is, I think, that this is so beautiful to see. And I think that's why it's so important to share our healing journeys. Like, yes, we were there. Yes, you and I, we've been in this crisis. It sucked. We got to that point where we really didn't want to live, even though from the outside, we had everything. But to get to a place now where it's like, no, I do like myself. I can put love towards myself. I can see the sunrise and then enjoy those things, that it is possible when you have the right support and the right people in your life.
Yeah. And that's so important because childhood trauma happens in relationships, right? Yes. And so healing happens in relationships.
Yes.
It's so important to get connected to people that you can trust and can relate to. And one of the hardest things for some of my clients is the realization that most people in their lives are not good for them. Because when you grow up in abuse and that becomes your comfort zone and you don't learn boundaries and you don't have good self-esteem, so many people will say, "Why do I always pick the wrong partner?" Yes. You're not picking the wrong partner. People like that, people that will take advantage of you and abuse you, they're everywhere. The difference is some people have self-esteem and boundaries. And so when a person who's an abuser or narcissist comes at you, the people with boundaries and self-esteem don't let them stay in their lives.
Yeah.
People who grow up in abuse don't know that they have the right to say no. They don't know that they don't have to have that person in their lives. All they know is they want to be loved because they didn't get it their whole life. And so it's really important to identify who's in your life that's healthy for you. So sometimes because we didn't know that, we end up with a lot of friendships and maybe partners that aren't good for us. And as we start to heal, we realize, oh, these are actually not healthy people for me. And so it's kind of sad. And, we have to grieve that because to really have good growth, you've got to have boundaries and you've got to have help your self-esteem and not have people that are abusive in your life. And so it really is important to find healthy people that can support your healing and not serve to just keep making you feel bad.
So true. There'll be people that disappear out of your life when you're healing, as you getting better, and they to them it doesn't make sense for whatever that's their journey or whatever they're doing. Right. They're criticizing you for what you do, and then they just disappear, or you say no contact, but that this is part of the healing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And there are some people who will heal with you, but when you've got someone in your life and they're putting you down for getting better, that's someone who's not good for you. I have so many, my poor clients, I have so many people in their lives that blame me. They're like, I knew your therapist was going to turn you against me. And I'm like, I'm not. I don't badmouth anybody. I honestly don't. I help people find self-esteem and get back to the whole person that they are. And when they do, they're like, well, crap, why have I put up with this for so long?
Yes.
And they want more for themselves.
Yes.
I would rather, the musical Wicked.
Yeah.
There's a line in one of the songs in Wicked where Elphaba the Green Witch says, I might be alone, but at least I'm alone and free. Right. So right now I'm not in a relationship. I've got my kids, I've got my house, and I've got so many friends that are survivors of abuse and are healthy for me. Yes. They're not all survivors of abuse, but I would rather be alone in my house with these friends that I have than be stuck in a relationship that I'm not free in, and it perpetuates my feeling bad. But when we've got those attachment wounds, we're just so desperate for love anywhere that we'll put up with stuff that we really shouldn't be putting up with.
Yes, because the love comes from the outside. For me to feel of value and worthy comes from the outside. But once you have that from the inside, that you just know whether I'm alone or not, of value, I am worthy, I am lovable. If that comes from the inside, you're no longer dependent on having people around you to confirm that for you or to give you that kind of feeling. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
That was such a beautiful share. Thank you so much, Traci, for making so much time for us. I think we talked for nearly an hour, but I think there was so many gold nuggets, so much wisdom, so much, inspiration in that. So I really value your time. So thank you.
I appreciate you doing this. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. You're welcome.